is, what path did you follow to become a writer? What journey did you undertake? And when did you, without hesitation, know that you could say, I am a writer? Any takers on that one? Not, I've got some more.
Well, I followed the path of, oh gosh, I need to publish some articles or I won't get tenure. Boy, that's not really inspiring, is it?
Reality.
Yes, it is. And the weird thing is that the stuff I write to get tenure is read by maybe 50 people. It goes in philosophy journals that nobody reads. I'd written this one humorous piece in graduate school and just left it out on the table, and one of my professors said, oh, this is funny, you should send this to this journal. And it got published, this is 30 years ago, right? And out of the blue, I get an email 3 years ago by someone that had read this that wanted to publish amusing introduction to philosophy graphic novel. So always check your email and believe it, even if it seems unreasonable. You know, McGraw-Hill wants to publish a book. Yeah, sure, they do. But don't do that. And write anything. Don't just write this articles to get tenure. Write the other stuff that interests you, and maybe it'll come back to you someday.
Thank you, sir. Well, one comment I wanted to add. Please, if you have a question at any point, fire away. We want you to.
I'll take a stab at it. I'm a journalist, and I had no desire to be a journalist when I walked hallways that are very similar to the hallways you walk now. Not exactly the same. The footprint of this campus. What happened for me was that when I got out of college, I was working at a publication called Foreign Policy magazine, and it was only meant to be a year between my undergraduate degree and then going on to get a PhD. That's all it was supposed to be. And I was spending some time working at this magazine, and I was so low on the masthead there was barely room, you know. But my job was to see the manuscripts come in when they would be submitted to the magazine. And a lot of the people that were submitting to Foreign Policy were people that I had been reading on my syllabuses in college. And so, and that was one of the big reasons I wanted to spend a year there, was it was going to be an opportunity to sort of see these people and see their work and see what happens. And I had an epiphany relatively early on in the job, which is I was seeing these sort of first draft submissions for publication, and they were awful. And I couldn't believe it. It was like, it was seeing sort of some of my real heroes unvarnished. And I had this realization that, oh my goodness, there were all these editors who were intervening in this process between that work and the work that I had been reading for all these years. And that had, any sort of intimidation or fear that I had at that point sort of melted away, because it was a very empowering sort of realization, because then you sort of said, wait a minute, I've had that thought, and I think I can take a stab at this. And so it was based on that, sort of actually being able to see behind the curtain, that I realized I'm going to start writing right now, and that's how it started.
Thank you. Any questions?
I wanted to just sort of add one thing. Marilyn and I were talking before this event about the importance of when you're a student and you're interested in creative writing, having teachers who look at you and tell you, there's something there. Because when you're young, you don't believe that. I mean, you don't just naturally sort of believe, I'm a writer, I have what it takes. And getting that kind of validation early on in the process from people that you're with every day in class and you have this immense respect for, I think often allows you to begin to believe that you can start on that process. And the other thing I wanted to say is, I remember being at this talk with the writer Nick Flynn, and someone asked him, how do you know when it's okay to call yourself a writer? And he said, well, there's not some magic muse or spirit who comes down, and there's no reviewer, there's no one who's going to come to you and say, now you've done it. you're a writer. If you write every day, if you have that kind of discipline and commitment, then you can call yourself a writer. And it has nothing to do with whether you can point to a certain amount of publications or awards or any of it. It's all about that discipline.
Anybody else like to respond to that?
What she said.
Are the two of you suggesting that in graduate school, you come up to you and say, you're good at this? Y'all must have had very different graduate school experiences, right? Oh, okay. Yes, here, that's true. Just making sure that we're talking about SDS, not graduate.
Yeah, no one tells you anything about except how bad you are
Yeah.
at graduate school. This is when you lose your faith as a graduate school.
No, that is really true, and I hope that you guys are experiencing opportunities to write here, but even if you don't, have opportunities to do creative writing necessarily in class, that doesn't mean you can't do it at home alone by yourself. Sad little basements. Yeah, I mean, well, for me, like, I was inspired to, I don't know what the genesis of it was. For me, like, it started really early, and somebody asked me this recently, and the first thing I could remember was, actually two things. One was that I just thought the act of writing was really cool. I liked that adults could write. Like, when I was really little, I remember having notebooks and just doing these, like, loops and thinking I was writing cursive, and, like, just, it'll turn into words I can understand at some point, because, like, this is what adults do, because that's what it looked like to me, and I just would fill these notebooks with just notes, and that weren't actual letters, but I thought maybe they would become that somehow through hearing that. And also, like, dictating a story to my mom. I made her, she bought me these little, I was in the Hello Kitty, and I was like 5 years old, and she bought me these little Hello Kitty stamps, and I did the stamps, and, like, the characters were coming in and out of a house and things like that, but I couldn't write down what I wanted to have happening, and so I told my mom, like, write this down, and, like, this is happening, so it would be like a comic strip, and, or a story, and it was just, like, it just seemed like a thing to do, I don't know, and, yeah, you don't need somebody to, there's not, like, a magical person that says, and so you shall, and like, you just have to do it every day, like, it's not about even getting published, I think, it is, and that's nice, that's really nice, but I think it's about you doing the work, and more the older I get, I think that's what it's about, and there's a lot of different people writing on a lot of different levels in terms of publications and things like that, but I think if you write every day, you're a writer, and even if it's not every day, even if it's like every week, but if you devote some time and care to your craft, that's what makes you a writer, is caring about it. That's what makes you anything that you want to do, is just caring about it, caring deeply about the work that you do. That's what makes you good at it, that's what makes you love it, that's what makes you care about it, and it just feeds itself. So do work that you care about, and care about the work that you do, and the rest is just gravy.
Any questions? You're all SD, oh, I'm sorry.
Just curious,
Mr. Love.
how has the introduction of digital media affected you as writers? I mean, is it a different game now than it was in the 90s?
It's distracting. Gotta turn it off sometimes.
I mean, as far as being a publisher, does that change who you write to? I mean, it is getting published. Does that affect you guys?
Not to keep talking, but I can kind of speak to that a little bit. I find that for me, like the young adult world of those books, a lot of that is very grassroots, and it's a lot of it's very word of mouth, and it's young people have blogs now that are really super engaged. I mean, people y'all's age and slightly older have these blogs that have, some of them have hundreds of readers, and it's just basically them doing a book report every time they read a book, and they're just really passionate about reading and writing. Some of you might have these blogs, I don't know, but a lot of those people have just found me and reached out to me and said, will you do an interview for my blog? And they send me questions, and I'm like, yeah, fire it away. And, I don't know, they're not an official news outlet or anything, but I'm happy to do those, and I find that I reach more people that way. In a way, I get, people tweeting at me and stuff like that after one of those comes out, more so than anything official. So to me, it's the internet has been helpful in just sort of creating a community of readers and writers that communicate with me directly, and that's really cool. I mean, as far as like my books being ebooks or whatever, it's, you know, I don't know. I'm not an ebook person, but some people are, so I'm glad that it's available in as many formats as possible. But I don't know. But you guys would have heard it.
I'd like to add, and what I do is very different because I do academic writing. My area is really education and early childhood education in addition to child development. And I think about this issue a lot because, as you mentioned, the way when we were in grad school, if you had anything to say, you sent it off to a journal. They told you it was terrible. I'm glad Bill mentioned that. You revised it 5 or 6 times. Then they publish it, and nobody reads it except for the top people in the field. And one of the things that I've seen really change in my field is that we are creating a lot of, and I create a lot of materials for early childhood educators, so it's not just academic writing. But one of the things that I'm really seeing is when I'm funded through grants, often federal grants, part of the deal is that we have to create materials and we put them on the internet as PDFs and they're free to anybody. So any early childhood educators could access them, but also the other stuff. And I've really seen that change in the field. People are saying, this is ridiculous. We've got all this good information and nobody can read it. So people are putting it on websites, and a lot of that is being funded by big organizations in the government, basically. But to me, that's very exciting because I feel like we are much better at getting information to the masses that's helpful. So I realize it's really different from ebooks, which I'm a big fan of. But I like the regular thing too. But to me, I've seen some really positive change with media.
I mean, I'd say that in some ways it's much better, just because from the point of view of a writer, there's just so many more opportunities to write now. I mean, I feel like when I was starting out, you could almost, you didn't need, you didn't need all your digits on 2 hands to count the number of places that you had an opportunity essentially to sort of break through. So it was very limited. And now there's just so many platforms which alternatives from the point of view of the writer to reach out to. And then another way to think about it is, as not as a writer, but as someone who works at a magazine, we're not just, in fact, we're hardly reading just the New York Times, the Washington Post, or other publications. We're reading widely, we're reading those blogs. And then in some instances, we find writers that way. And, like a very popular writer that we hired about 2 years ago, he's an astronomer. He writes about astronomy. I could care less about astronomy. Right? That's just not something that I'm personally interested in. But our magazine's readers are deeply interested in it, it turns out. And it turned out that this guy had just a wonderful following of people who cared deeply about astronomy. And so at some point, it was just sort of obvious to us that we just need to essentially take his blog, and we just need to bring it under the umbrella of Slate and make him a Slate writer. But he created that, in essence. And so that wouldn't have been possible 20 years ago.
I have this memory of like one of the first conversations I had with my agent before the book came out, my first book came out, and she said, well, what's your platform like on social media? And I said, what platform? and she said, well, you're on Facebook, right? And I said, no. And this was like 2009, and she said, well, what about Twitter? And I just kept laughing and thinking, well, what am I going to tweet? You have this character limit. Am I just going to say, like, oh, I had a ham sandwich for lunch? Like, who's going to care about this? But what I didn't realize at the time is, that really you can use your writing as a kind of calling card to bring people to your books. And so that was sort of my experience, is that you can use Twitter actively by following other writers whose work you respect. They often follow you. You can write short pieces that maybe, for me, I'm a fiction writer, but I sometimes will do travel pieces for other venues, and I can use Twitter to kind of get that out. And I've had so many people find my books through those small pieces that actually, made their way out into the world via Twitter or Facebook. So I think, and that's really important for, I think, you guys to hear, as well as you're starting out, that you can use Twitter and you can use Facebook in that active way, in a way that really starts to generate your career as writer. it doesn't have to just be like pictures of Grumpy Cat. I mean, you could, you know, follow writers whose work you love and tell them that, you know. I always talk to students and they're like, well, is it okay to tweet at, you know, Dan Shawn or Cheryl Strayed? And I say, like, well, yes, as long as you're saying, you know, yeah, as long as you're not stalking that person. You know, tell them that you love their work, that you respect what they're doing. That means something to them. And, you know, who knows, that may be a connection that could help you in the future.
I just wanted to add real quickly that coming from academic writing in journals, it's very different from the experiences that these, I would call them real writers, have. But what is the debt I owe to SDS among many is that Ann Dobbs and many other English teachers taught me how to write basically by threatening my life.
Basically.
And when I graduated, I told Mrs. Dobbs, I'm never going to have to write another paper in my life. Thank you. I got a 5 on the AP English exam, so I'm opted out of all the classes at Vanderbilt, and now I'm going to go be a doctor or a molecular biologist and never write again. Oops. I switched to philosophy, and all I can do is write. It's my only professional mode of advancement or communication or anything. And knowing how to write makes everything easier and better, even if you don't become a novelist or an academic writer or whatever. It's like having a magic wand when you can write something that people read and understand and get something out of, because not very many people do it very well. As you were saying, it's the submissions to so pay attention. Let them threaten your lives. Let them make you better writers.
Thank you. Lee, you had a question.
So while you're writing a book, do you ever feel motivated by the positive impact your writing could create?
Well, I mean, well, you guys are the, you know, academic writers, and we're the fiction writers, so probably we're thinking about impacts in different ways, and you're the editorial guy, but I mean, you probably, you're on, you know, line directly, you're probably thinking more immediately of like your immediate impact.
I mean, I think with a book, absolutely. And I think it's true, I mean, it depends. I mean, in terms of writing in general. In some instances, it's not necessarily so noble as positive impact as much as it is a belief that there's a particular argument or set of ideas that should be put forward. And let it go out there and disagree with it or agree with it. That's actually doesn't have any bearing on whether or not I should write it or not. I'm going to write it, and maybe that'll produce a conversation or debate. And if that happens, that's great. I would say separately for my book, it was, you know, it began for me as a fairly analytical endeavor. I had a set of questions and concerns that I wanted to sort of test, propositions. I wanted to see if they would hold true or not. It was very intellectual for me initially, and it didn't stay that way for long, because in a large measure, my book was, you know, there's a wonderful academic literature that exists on the resilience of authoritarian regimes and dictatorships in the world. But what was motivating me was that there were people around the world who were actually living this experience. They had no familiarity with the fact that there was this body of literature out there about them, but they had an intuitive sense of exactly what that literature was about and what analysts had been saying, but they were living it. They were living the struggle. And so for me, it's very, I would find it, I would be suspect that a human being who would meet these people and not come away with a deep personal connection. So yes, in fact, and there are instances now where I write about them, and I'm writing about them, I remain intellectually curious about what they are engaged in, but sometimes it does feel like an obligation, because if someone doesn't write about them, then who's going to write about them?
In the most base sense imaginable, I'll tell you that the reason there's so many intro to philosophy textbooks out there is because every time you teach intro to philosophy, you buy someone else's text and you think, this is just awful. For 20 years, I promised myself I would never write an intro text, and finally I did it, and in my mind, I have set the world aright. Intro class again. But that's obviously false. I'm sure there are people cursing my book right now, thinking, I could do better than this. is. I did think it would have some point and some purpose that I was supportive of. Not going to change the world, but I had to be motivated by something.
Thank you. Question over here.
When you first started writing, did you just kind of like automatically know what genre you wanted to go into? It's like, oh, I'm going to be a fiction writer or something, or did it take a while to decide?
I wrote some terrible poetry for a long time. Actually, here. Don't look for it, please. No, I wrote a lot of really bad poetry for a long time, but I think I was also writing fiction simultaneously. And, I don't know if there was sort of one moment where everything came together and I felt like I'm a fiction writer. I think I just felt like there's maybe a little bit more space to explore something, in fiction. And the more I did it, the stronger I felt as a fiction writer. And I felt myself pulling back on poetry. But that mostly happened, I think, as an undergrad in college.
Yeah, you realize you can't make any money as a poet.
Yeah, that's what it was really about.
It's all about money. No. Sorry, I'm making cynical jokes, but no, it's. I think because I had a weird thing with that because the first book I wrote, I just wrote it to be like a fun. I thought I was just writing like a comedic novel about that just happened to be about teenagers, and I think it came about because I was a young adult at the time, and it just wasn't very mature. So like the first conversation I had with my agent. On the phone, she was saying, like, why do you like YA? Why do you want to start writing YA? And I was like, what is YA she was talking about? I thought it was like a foreign word or something. She was saying. And I honestly, it took me a minute to, see, what did she, I'm just trying to stay in the conversation. And I'm faking it. And then I realized, oh, young adult, this is a young adult book is what she's trying to say. And it just never occurred to me to, market it towards young adults. But then it was obvious. It's like, of course, this is a book about teenagers. And this is totally a young adult book, and I hadn't really thought of it, and sometimes other people will kind of tell you what your work is, and you'll kind of be marketed in a certain way. It's like, oh, this is for this sort of genre, and maybe you can tweak it a little bit more, and it's even more going to be sort of a mystery, or it's even play up these mystery elements, or play up this crime thing. It's a crime book or whatever. But I think you don't necessarily sit down and choose to, or I don't say this shall be for readers 16 and up. It's just let's see where the story goes. Let's play with it and see, and maybe, But I mean, some people do. I'm sure, when Janet Ivanovich sits down, she knows she's going to write another book about the cat who murdered somebody or whatever it is. So, she's the one with the murder cats, right? What's the one with the cat that solved crimes or something? Anyway, but you know what I mean? Some people are totally on their genre, once they start doing it, they just turn out fun. But for some people, you're going to experiment more. And for you young writers, I would say don't lock yourselves down into thinking oh, well, this is going to be my supernatural vampire academy. You can just see where it goes, and maybe it turns out being more or less one thing or another. And just the early stages, you're just kind of flowing with it, and then when it's final, when you're editing or getting into those final stages, and hopefully talking to agents or editors or whoever, that's when maybe it gets turned into a little bit more of okay, this is who we're going to market this at. That sort of answer the question.
The common thread that we're hearing here, and thank you very much, is that writing is something that we all can do, and it's not something that's just reserved for the happy few, the talented few. We thought it was about creative writing. No, it's academic writing. Well, cartoon philosophy writing, and across the board. So, thank you for those comments. I would like to shift gears here briefly, just a little bit. Do I have a question? One second. Let me set up the next question.
Okay.
I got you guys. You mentioned Ann Dobbs and SDS. In the few minutes we have remaining, if any of you have any SDS stories that you would like to share that somehow contribute to your writing career, we'd love to hear them, because we love this place, and we can tell you do too. Okay, yes. Ms.
This actually
Hoots.
was a question about high school experience. What did you want to be when you grew up, when you were in high school?
That's funny. I mean, it was grueling. It was grueling. And I'm thinking of Aunt Dobbs right now. I mean, I think I still have somewhere a sheet of essays that it was like one a day. We've written every AP English history question. We've written the essay that had been asked every test for 25 years. And so it was just, I mean, I just have this, I have a desk at home that I used to do my homework in, and if you look at the wood on the desk, you can still see the words that were just like, carving, on the desk, like 1 in the morning, writing these things. But it was also the case that I was writing in all my classes, and at the same time, I was, one of the best things that happened to me, there were a lot of things that were great that happened here, but one of the best things that happened to me was my senior year, I took a class with Linda Hudgens, APR history, and there were 4 students in that class, and which was just amazing that that there would be a teacher who would sort of show up to work to just teach 4 people, and that was also the same sort of thing that while we were doing AP English, we were writing all these essays for her, and so it was just I was writing all the time, and for me, I think a large part of it, I don't know that what I was writing was particularly good. But what I was writing, what I was being taught that I wasn't doing well, and what I was constantly getting better at, I think because of my time here, was I was learning to think analytically. And that, to me, was that's the single greatest gift that I carried forward with me in everything I've done. That's, everything everyone's up here has said is true about writing and how personal it is, and I identify with sort of how people come to it. But one of the things, besides like writing, prose that captivates people, the other thing that's really sorely missing, and that I see a lot in my work, is people who can think analytically about a problem, who can sort of then say something about it that someone hadn't thought of before. And that was, we were writing essays about 18th century art, but that's what we were doing, and that was crucial. I was also I also worked on the Griffin, and I was ultimately, I don't know how that happened, but that was also, I didn't realize that later on that I would be involved with magazines, but I started, that happened here. But to answer your question, when I left, because of that, I was so overwhelmed by my APR history class, I was convinced that I was going to become an art dealer. And I was going to work in New York City in a very distinct sense of it. I showed up at Middlebury College with an intent of studying art history and economics. And I was going to meld those things together, and I was going to have an utterly different life than I actually had. So I have made many predictions along the way about things I was going to do at different times. I have never been correct.
Can I just say really quick?
Yes, please.
I really wanted to be a therapist. And my first class when I was in graduate school, where I was going to learn how to be a therapist, he talked, and I thought, this is not for me. But it took me a couple more years to acknowledge that. And so one thing that I would say to someone your age is be willing to follow your dream, but also be willing to let that dream go. If you get passionate about something that's totally not being an art dealer when you were in college, and listen to that. Say, this thing is making me feel excited, and be willing to follow that. If that's your new path.
I was going to be a doctor. I redeclared my molecular biology major at Vanderbilt. And for sure that was it. I got the major, but then I got a double major in philosophy, and that's what turned out. But it was, besides Mrs. Dobbs, whose influence on me is incalculable, David Emery taught biology, AP biology, and the textbook we were using had a picture of the vascular system of a plant. And I read the caption to it, and it occurred to me that picture is upside down. The way they described it, they placed it in the book upside down. And I raised my hand and told Mr. Emery this in front of the class. And he said, well, we'll see about that, Michael. And I went after class and I said, I think this is upside down. He said, it's hard for me to believe they'd make this mistake. And it just dropped. And a month later, he comes back with a letter from the publisher saying, thank you for writing us about this. The plate is indeed upside down in the book, and we'll correct it in subsequent editions. And that's the first time I feel like I felt so empowered and respected by a professor, and that maybe I had abilities to analyze and to think about what I was reading that might even surpass anyone else that had looked at the book already, or at least in this one case, I got something right that dozens and dozens of people have looked at and gotten wrong. And that was just one of those moments that you remember forever. I mean, I still could probably write down the caption about the xylem flow. So, yeah, change your mind when it's time to change your mind, but do what seems important to you at the time. And you're in an amazing place for being able to do that. And Mrs. Dobbs let Mark Swofford and I write terrible, terrible things in the Skyliner, and that was fun. We wrote horrible, cynical articles talking about how terrible school was. And actually, I still have a typed note from then headmaster Mike Johnson telling Mrs. Dobbs that Swofford and I were not to publish articles like that. And that was pretty influential too. She didn't get fired, so.
Did you have a question?
My question was just like
Same one.
Maddie's.
Okay, we're almost out of time, but you guys have been so forthcoming and open and witty, and this has been fun. I want to ask you one more question. Those of us who are writers and keep been writing, we submit things, sooner or later, that dreaded rejection slip comes along. Please tell us how to deal with those, because they enter everybody's lives, do they not? And then we'll go.
Cry for a few minutes.
There you go.
Tomorrow rewrite it and resubmit it.
I respond by thinking, boy, those editors certainly are stupid. I need to submit this to a smarter journal. And then I rewrite it.
Actually, that is a good point, though. I mean, you should make sure that where you're sending your work is a good place for your work. That's just kind of it may seem obvious, but, you know, some people just send out things to, like, everywhere, and some, you know, maybe, like, 9 of those 10 places are just not publishing stuff that's like what you're writing, so there's kind of, you know, like, don't waste the postage, you know, or the email is good, maybe, but, yeah, actually, I just went through a thing with being rejected. My first 2 books came out, and I got a really nice advance for those, and they came out from Henry Holt, and I was like, hey, you know, big stuff. And then I wrote this 3rd book that nobody wanted. My editor at Holt didn't want it. My agent sent it to every editor in her Rolodex for 2 years, and it was turned down by everybody. And we finally, in the winter of 2014, she gave me a call and said, you know, I'm really sorry, but there's just nobody that I know left to send this book to, large publisher or small. And she said, you know, maybe you can try self-publishing. That's a route that people go now on Barnes & Noble and Amazon. It's totally legit. But she said, I just don't have any other place to take this book. And but you are entitled to do the work. Give yourself time. Give yourself the permission to sit down and write what you want to write, what you feel. Just don't, you know, second guess yourself or get that bogged down in that negative voice in your mind that's saying, nobody's going to read this, nobody wants this, nobody likes this, I don't know what this is weird, I shouldn't be writing it, I should be doing something productive with my time. If you're writing, you are doing something productive with your time, and even if nobody ever reads it, if some tiny little press puts it out, if it just goes out online, that's all fine, it's all legitimate, but it's about the work, 100%, so he needs Coronado, who's
Since you guys have heard of us, let me have one tiny bit of advice if you're writing academic articles that are supposed to be argumentative and analytical. You know exactly what you mean and why you're saying what you say, and why, obviously, you've proven that point every possible way you can prove it in this article. But you're filling in all the gaps in your mind. You need to find someone that you love enough and that loves you enough that they can tell you that this isn't very good and they don't understand it, and then you can yell at them, and then you can go away and think, well, she's probably right. This is my life, sure. You need someone who can edit you. You need someone to point out, look, I know this makes sense to you, and I know you understand it, because I hear you talking about it, but you didn't get that on the page. And so that's a different sort of advice, but it's the same sort of thing. Don't just say, oh, my article was trash.
Yeah, no, that's true. If you have one good reader, and some of you, I mean, we've been friends since, what, like 3 years ago? Yeah, so, like, I mean, and she's one of my readers, like, I'll send her early drafts and stuff, she can send me early drafts and stuff, we write each other's books in manuscript form. If you have a friend right here in this room, or outside this room, but here at school, who's a good friend and knows your vibe, and is just, like, able to look at your stuff and say, like, hey, I get this, but, you know, this ending is like kind of a letdown, or whatever, you know, like, cultivate those relationships, keep in touch with each other. The people that you're sitting in this room with right now might end up being the people that help you along your career, not just as writers, but as writers, and, you know, might, you know, whatever your work is, to support you and lift you up and encourage you, and also tell you, like, no, this isn't working, we need to kind of fiddle with this a little bit more. So, yeah, 100%, 100%.
I'll also add, just with regard to the rejection slips, I, for years, kept, this was when you would get them by mail, I kept them all in a binder. And eventually the spine of the binder broke. And this was like a medical binder that was just free in a hallway somewhere, and I took it, and it was this big, and the spine broke at a certain point. I still have it. I give it to my students sometimes, and I tell them, you know, you can all be immensely talented, you are immensely talented, but this is the reality. You're going to get this. And a couple of things. One is to pay attention to what each rejection slip says. There's the form rejection slip that goes out, and it's fairly impersonal, right? It goes out to everybody. There's also the kind of editor who sits down and gives you feedback and says, you know, this isn't the right piece for us. This is why this doesn't work. Don't just sort of look at that and say, okay, that stings, that's another rejection, I'm just going to, you know, throw it away and not think about it. There's often really, really good advice that you can take that, you know, take it to heart and improve that piece. And, you know, I mean, and I'll also add, I remember I had one rejection that just was my cover letter, and someone had written at the bottom, no. They were dying, and they wrote it in blood. That was not particularly helpful feedback. But yeah, like keep those rejections, and then also learn to feel empowered by them, which is what everybody's saying up here. Like, you can, when you've been rejected enough, you get to the point where you say, okay, I feel stronger for that. And this is, you know, if I get this rejection again, then I know I'm going to go out to 10 more places with this piece. And we have all experienced, we all have these binders, right, of rejection. And none of that is to say that it stops hurting, but at a certain point you realize that is part of this game, okay? And you just keep going, and you let it actually make you more powerful as a writer.
Okay, folks, what do you make of that? Pretty good advice, huh? Time out of your obviously very busy schedules to share this hour with us. Thank you very much.